Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this spectacular landmark venue of the National Museum of Qatar for exploring Islam's discussion on Christian and Muslim perspectives, spiritual crises. Today's event is part of a joint media campaign by the Exploring Islam Foundation and the Islam and Muslims Initiative. My name is Ramona Ali. I am a UK-based journalist, and I'm also the Director of Communications for Exploring Islam Foundation. And I have the deep privilege of being your host this afternoon in the beautiful city of Doha. You may have seen billboards and booths dotted around the city. This is all part of the campaign, which was launched to coincide with the World Cup, as an official resource which seeks to spread awareness about Islam and Muslim cultures among football fans and visitors who are visiting the city from all over the world. The campaign also includes a website, and of course there's a great series of talks taking place. Yesterday, we had the honor of hosting the Olympic fencer Ibtihaj Muhammad, who was the first American and the first African-American Muslim woman to compete in the Olympics in a hijab. We also hosted Nawal Akram, the comedian, athlete, and disability rights campaigner, and together they took us on their personal journeys of how they break down barriers every single day to create space for themselves and to create space for women like them. Today, we'll be discussing spiritual crises from two faith perspectives, and we have even more events coming up. So if you'd like to find out more details, you just scan the QR code behind me and go to the What's On section. For any tweeters and Instagrammers out there, please go ahead and follow us, Exploring Islam Foundation and the IMI, and do tag us, because we love to be tagged and we'd like to see how you're enjoying the event today. Now, I am very honored, or perhaps I should say I'm a little nervous, to be chairing today's speakers, because one of them happens to be my former boss, and the other is my current radio producer. So the pressure is on, but I'll try not to cave in. We are delighted to have Sarah Joseph, OBE, with us. She's a writer, a broadcaster, and she specializes in faith and social justice. She's the founder of ML, a media brand focused on the lived Muslim experience. Sarah was awarded an OBE in 2004 for services to interfaith dialogue and women's rights. She was listed as one of the world's 500 most influential Muslims by Georgetown University and the Royal Islamic Strategic Studies Centre of Jordan, and she's one of the UK's 100 most powerful by Carter Anderson. So you can see why I was a little nervous. So please, would you put your hands together and welcome Sarah Joseph to the stage. Thank you, Sarah. We are also happy to have with us the executive producer of TBI Media and the former BBC head of religious programming with us today. His name is Michael Wakelin, and he is a theology graduate who worked at the BBC for 23 years. That's as long as the mission of Islam actually was preached, Michael. And after leaving the corporation in 2010, he began working for the Cambridge University Interfaith Programme on a number of projects in partnership with Coexist House. One of the projects that Michael worked on is the Senior Faith Leadership Programme, where we actually first met, and another is the Religion Media Centre, of which he is executive chair. Michael also runs religious literacy training programs for big organizations. And finally, he is a sad and long-standing and suffering England fan. I mean, aren't we all on the panel today? Please welcome Michael Wakelin. Thanks so much, Michael and Sarah, for joining us. We are really fortunate to have you with us today. You've lived through so many challenges and so many crises in your professional lives and your personal lives. You see them through different perspectives, and we're really looking forward to hearing your wisdoms and insights, and I'm confident that you're going to solve all the spiritual crises in the world by 4:30 p.m. Before we get into that, that compelling conversation, I would like to highlight that we have a very distinguished guest in the audience. We're thrilled to have His Excellency Dr. Ibrahim Al-Nuaimi, who is the Under-Secretary of the Ministry of Education, and he's the head of the Interfaith Dialogue Center here in Doha. Welcome, Dr. Ibrahim, to the stage, and thank you so much for your opening remarks for today's event. Thank you. Please put your hands together.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Your Excellency, Lul wal Khatir, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, speakers, thank you for really coming today for this event. I don't want to take much of your time, although I have prepared a few pages of points to mention, but let me just make it as brief as possible. So I think Qatar is a modern Arab country that preserves its history, honor its heritage, maintains its culture, customs, beliefs, and tradition, and gives due respect to its religion and other religions. Qatar is open to the world, understands cultural diversity as a matter of fact, and believes in coexistence due to pluralism. Qatar as a nation pays attention to certain characteristics. I will mention some of those in my speech. In my country, many people believed in morals, spiritual values, and ethical equalities, and that improve human society and enables young people to have a bright future and peace. Due to time constraints, I'm going to focus on a few words of a few issues. The first one is the universality. So this is we can call it also diversity, and this means really that we in Qatar, when we hosted this FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022, we put that in as main issue, and next to it is the respect for one another. So we as a nation, we care and to build relations with others, with each other, in mutual respect. And we enjoy the essence of diversity and differences while recognizing the rights of each nation to express itself as it wishes. There should be no nation should direct or dictate to the other nations what it says, what it wants. And here we can enjoy the true meaning of the emerging beautiful concepts such as pluralism, coexistence, tolerance, freedom, and human rights. I'm going to go quickly through the few points I mentioned. One of them is the cultural understanding. So many people, no less than 1 million people have visited Qatar during the tournament. And for us and the Middle East countries, this is our first World Cup. And it's really great to have it in our country and to exchange between locals and people from all over the world that can promote cultural understanding. We care about cultural understanding and showcase what the region has to offer. As a result, Qatar has implemented several projects over the past decade to position itself as a regional cultural center and attract visitors. Among them, the opening of museums, cultural sites focused on Islamic and Arabic arts and traditions. Qatar also continues to support organizations and initiatives that promote intercultural exchange and is relaxing visa requirements for many nationalities. The principle of equality and non-discrimination are also very important values observed in the World Cup to facilitate intercultural communication and cross-cultural learning among all participants, visitors, and local communities attending the World Cup. The initiative focused on the principles of equality and non-discrimination to ensure a welcoming, safe, inclusive, and respectful tournament experience by all and for all. The third point that the FIFA World Cup is an opportunity really for the East in general and for the Arab and Gulf countries, in particular to convey to Europe and the world the Qatari and the Arabic and Muslim concept of morality, hospitality, and spirituality. And we can see it here. I think everybody had experienced it, those who are living here or visiting here. And among those who really focus on this issue is Infantino himself, when he said, "I'm European, for what we Europeans have been doing around the world in the last 3,000 years, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons to the people." And he said that just one day before the kickoff of the tournament. So the World Cup really should be shared space. This event should be shared space for a new modernity that isn't white or colonial. A modernity that speaks to Arab, Asians, Africans, indigenous, and Latin values of tolerance, human rights, and good gatherings, good governance, and challenges the stereotypes that are often thrust upon the global South. Fourthly, Qatar's spiritual experience as a world role model. Participants call for a global cultural reset along the lines of the Qatar experience. The World Cup in Qatar could help decolonize biased ideas about Arab and Muslim societies by using their diverse culture to enrich the global experience of football. Qatar's alcohol-free stadiums, for example, during the World Cup could be a good example. I don't want to go in details, but I think we all experienced and we found that really it was very clean and very respectful tournament. In conclusion, Qataris are used of living with foreigners. And the World Cup is another opportunity to show their affinity for multiculturalism, to counter the Western stereotypes of the fanatical Muslims, and has been the case recently in Islamophobic and some media outlets. By presenting an alternative narrative to the way the Muslims world and football are seen in the West, the World Cup could help decolonize the language of sport. European football is not white. It is African and Arab football, and they are not signs of color or ethnicity. These terms are far too often used in reporting on sport as a cause for dominant ethnicities and races. I'd like to thank you guys, thank the speakers for the time they're gonna, the ideas and the time they're gonna spend with us. And I'm so delighted to be part of this event. And thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. You were speaking about such important issues, and thank you so much as well. You know, Qatar is spreading awareness about our Muslim values and about hospitality as well. You're showing the world how wonderfully hospitable you are. So thank you so much for your words and for everything that you've done. And now I would like to hand over the stage to Michael Wakelin, who hopefully will take his mind off England losing by focusing on his presentation. Thank you, Michael.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please hold my microphone the right way round. That's better. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. It's a great privilege and an honor for me to be here. And I'm very grateful for the invitation coming from the Exploring Islam Foundation and also the Islam and Muslims Initiative. Thank you so much for having me here, and thanks for your kind introduction, Ramona. So, my voice may be a bit hoarse. This is after Harry Kane scored one penalty. Had he scored the other penalty, I wouldn't be able to speak at all. So, bit closer, bit closer, bit closer. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the spiritual crisis, particularly from the Christian faith perspective. And in order to understand that, though, I want to take us on a short journey as to how we've got to this particular spiritual crisis, which is affecting Christianity, particularly in Western Europe and indeed the United States. So Bear with me, there's some better news at the end, but some of it will be a bit controversial perhaps on the way. So, about 50 years ago, sociologists predicted that religion would disappear by about now. Religious people, the few that were left, would be huddled in corners talking to each other and be rather frightened of the secular world which had taken them over. Of course, that didn't happen at all. Religion didn't, in fact, go anywhere. The Economist magazine, that some of you may read, had a front cover in the year 2000 saying, "God is dead." In 2010, they had another front cover saying, "God is back," if he or she ever went away in the first place. And it's worth remembering, too, that the world is and will be a very religious place. 84% from Pew Research tells us of the world has an affiliation to a religious faith. 2.3 billion more religiously affiliated people by 2050, and more than 2/3 of the world's population places religion as more important than family. That is quite an extraordinary statistic. However, because sociologists told us that religion was going away, over the last 50 years, media, particularly in the West I'm talking about here, government, education, society, has largely abandoned religion and left us with a really toxic vacuum of lack of understanding of religion. And all sorts of awful things can happen in toxic vacuums. There is desperate religious illiteracy. There is a paucity of understanding around religion and a paucity of debate around the religious subject matter, which makes religious illiteracy the predominant thing, particularly in regards to the media. And the media are hugely important. I know that today most young people get their news from TikTok and Instagram, but the general traditional media is also very important. We're going to think about the news a little bit. We're going to think about big movies and big television series too. So let's just go on to this slide here. These will be unpleasant and familiar pictures. I felt they were worth showing though, because religion has a habit of writing its own bad news. It's got a particular penchant for it and has done over the years. They're ghastly. I don't want to go into these stories, except for the Christian one, perhaps, the Catholic Church child abuse scandals, which have been absolutely catastrophic for the Christian faith. I'm not sure it'll ever properly recover. The trust that was lost has been absolutely appalling and has left the Christian faith reeling across the West, Western Europe and the States. And as I say, religion is responsible quite a lot for its bad coverage. However, there is better news coverage too of religion. I think the way the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen was filmed and covered around the world has been extremely strong. Obviously, the British do pageantry very well and it looks fantastic, but more importantly in there was the reporting of the Queen's own personal faith. She was a devout Christian, and I think her mantle has been taken on well by King Charles, and I think he's standing up as defender of the faith, and I think all that's good news for Christianity. I love this bit of good news story as well from last week that was covered in Islam television and picked up by the Religion Media Centre, which I'll be talking about at the end. And I love this because it showed that British football fans particularly discovered when they came to Qatar that they could enjoy football without being drunk, which that's normally how they enjoy it back home. Although I must say when England lost, it was a little bit tempting. But that was a great news story of how when religions get their message out there, well, it will be reported. And that will help to counterbalance lots of the negative speak as well. This is a day that happens in the UK every year, Mitzvah Day, which is run by our Jewish friends. And they gather together other religious bodies too, and they do good works in their communities. It often gets covered on the news and in our newspapers as well, which is very nice. Again, a good news story provided by the religious communities. But we're very influenced by the movies, obviously, and by the big television series that come out. There was a time when a drama happened, and it would go out, people would watch it, they might talk about it the next day, and then they'd forget about it. But now, when these big budget, fantastically acted, brilliantly produced dramas happen, they're there forever. They're on Netflix and Prime Video and all the other different streaming services. And If they were putting out bad news, and this was about 15 years ago now, that bad news is still there. I don't know if you saw 24. Jack Bauer was a US agent fighting terrorists. By and large, those terrorists were Muslim. It was appallingly anti-Islamic on it and the way it presented these stories. And the series went on forever. It was brilliantly produced. Everyone watched it, and it's still out there. There were so many complaints about the way Islam was presented that towards the end, the producers, including Kiefer Sutherland, to be fair, decided they would put in a positive Muslim story. And you may remember a generous, peaceful, loving imam was introduced, and he had a very holy moment with Jack Bauer towards the end. But unfortunately, the damage is done. I mean, there are tons of examples of this in movies where religion is badly represented, and unfortunately, it is still out there. And it's come about because of religious illiteracy that I mentioned earlier. That's people in the media who don't get religion, who don't understand it, and therefore portray it badly. And trying to rectify that and put that wrong right is extremely difficult. Professor Linda Woodhead is a sociologist and theologian, head of the theology department at King's College London. She was the Religion Media Centre's annual lecturer this year, and this is a really stinging quote that I took from her lecture. Religious organisations have had their day because they have harmed, not healed, because they have interposed themselves between us and God, and because they are no longer being experienced by most as living well springs of truthful spiritual experience. This is the real damning one. Religious organisations have had their day because they become a barrier and not a bridge. I think that's very hard to argue against in a United Kingdom context and in a Western European context, and I would hazard a US context as well. And it was shown in the UK census results, which came out last week. I wouldn't have put these up had they been further along ago, but it's a very contemporary, current story for us. In the United Kingdom now, Christians are less than 0.5% of the population. We kind of knew that was going to happen, but it's still quite stark to see it out there. So people are saying the United Kingdom is no longer a Christian country, but the actual truth is far fewer than that actually go to church. So Christianity is in a real spiritual crisis at the moment. There's no question about that. And the biggest thing after Christianity, there's still 26 million or so say they're Christian, but the biggest one after that are people who say they're no religion. That's how bad it's become, because the people who say they are non-religious actually do practice a religion. Many of them believe in God. They just don't want to be part of an organized religion, like the church, for example, which is really damning on the way that the Christian church particularly has handled itself over the last few decades. So we are in this situation now where people are fleeing away from organized religion, and particularly the church. I'm going to address some of the reasons why I think this is and what we can do about it very briefly. And I think the first thing we need to do is to get rid of Jesus. I'm just checking you're all still listening. I don't mean the real Jesus. I mean blonde-haired Jesus. This is nice, easygoing Jesus who doesn't challenge you very much. In the aftermath of the census, one particular journalist from the Times said she would tick the Christian box because it's the blandest religion on offer. Lord, help us. How did Jesus become bland? I blame partly the fact that he looks like that in so much of our understanding. He's nice, according to that, but you see, I don't think Christianity is about being nice. It's not about being kind. Jesus was gentle with people who really suffered. But for people like me, I would find him a really awkward companion. He would look at my life and say, "Come on, Michael, you can do better than this." He would be quite a hard judge of me because I've got lots of privileges. And I think Jesus should be an uncomfortable companion. And I don't want him to look like that anymore. I really don't look like this, he says. And that's important. And I've got a new image of Jesus. Well, it's not new. If you Google, this is one of the images that comes up. It's one of the very few where Jesus isn't blonde-haired and blue-eyed. We made a documentary about Jesus for BBC One earlier, about a few years ago now, but we looked into the historical Jesus. And we worked with an anthropologist who found skulls in the desert outside Jerusalem, quite controversial. and he was collecting them. And we asked him if he could make up a first century face for us, a male face, using police forensic techniques. So this is made from a first century Jewish skull found outside Jerusalem. And of course, back then, people didn't move around very much. They didn't intermarry very much. So this is actually very much what Jesus may well have looked like. We never said it was Jesus, but the press did, which was great for us. They said, the face of Jesus, and it was on all the front pages, and we got a Radio Times front cover for our work. But we never said he was Jesus. He isn't. But this is what Jesus may well have looked like. And I like him. I like him because he scares me slightly. He's intense. This is more the passionate Jesus that spoke truth to power. This is the Jesus that stood up and said, I have come to give good news to the poor. This is the Jesus that wants to free the oppressed, to get alongside those who suffer. This is the Jesus who stood up and said, turn the other cheek, not as an invitation to come and walk all over me, but as an invitation, as an act of defiance, saying, now hit me again, and really mean it. This is the Jesus who said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And he knew what hunger and thirst really meant. This is the Jesus who said, blessed are the peacemakers, not as a pat on the head to the passive, but as a kick up the backside to the inactive. This is the Jesus who really meant business and wanted to turn the world upside down. And I like him because of that. And I like him because I think Gen Z would like him too. I don't think they want the blonde-haired Jesus. Sparing no expense for you, I looked up Gen Z on Google, and this is what I found. Aren't they lovely? They don't want blonde-haired Jesus. Young people can sniff out hypocrisy very quickly. They can sniff out insincerity. And I think they would love Jesus, the real Jesus, because he was on the fringes of society. He was criticizing the establishment. He was a fantastically charismatic man. And that's the man we need to get back to. Do you know Gen Z don't recognize Jesus at all? My son, Oliver, is 13. He is surprisingly religious for a 13-year-old, but can't be to do with his dad. But he told me he cannot possibly say that he's a Christian at school because he wouldn't have any friends. They'd all think he was mad. How on earth have we got to the point where to talk about Jesus is so embarrassing, it's social suicide? How has that happened? And, sorry, I was getting a bit emotional then. So we need to really dig back to the real Jesus, find him and present him to young people. I was making a documentary for BBC Radio 1, and we did a documentary about Jesus, and we were looking at whether we could improve his image to attract him, to make him more attractive to young people. And we sent off this request to one of the big publicity PR companies, Saatchi & Saatchi, and we said to them, can you revamp Jesus for the modern generation? And they came back and they said, I'm sorry, his name is so toxic that we're going to have to rename him and call him Sahara. Okay, just leave that thought with you. How bad is that? Okay, another thing we need to lose is popularity. Why on earth do we think Christianity should be popular? It wasn't part of Jesus' mission statement at all. He came to bring good news to the poor and free the oppressed. That was going to get him into trouble with the hierarchy. It was going to lead to a very uncomfortable life. He had some popularity, but it soon went when people really realized what his message was about. So full churches, they make me suspicious. Something's usually wrong with a full church. A new language. I've nearly finished, I promise. This is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, if you don't know him, a Christian martyr from the Second World War. He opposed Hitler. He was part of the plot to kill Hitler, and a very great theologian. And he talked about this new day when there will be a new language, perhaps quite non-religious, but liberating and redeeming, like Jesus' language. It will shock people. It'll be powerful. It'll be the language of a new truth proclaiming God's peace with the world. That was what he said, and I think that's the new language we now need to find, because we get so used to slipping into Christian cliche and using words that the great mass of people no longer understand. Okay, I've nearly finished. I want to leave you with the Religion Media Centre, which is a big plug for the organisation which I help to run. And we are an independent body that says religion, we don't promote religion, we don't say it's good or bad, we say it matters. It matters crucially to people, and journalists should cover it to the highest editorial standards. We don't promote one faith, we cover all faiths and none. But journalists love us because we're independent, we're not pushing a party line. And we offer them news, we offer them tremendous fact sheets and events, and I do warmly recommend that you look us up and download us, and we're trusted by all the major media outlets now. That was the news from a couple of days ago, and that's just some of the fact sheets that we cover, written authoritatively by people who really know what they're talking about. I'm going to stop talking there. I can't wait to hear what you've thought about the things I've said. Perhaps you can pick up with that afterwards in the Q&A. And I'm going to hand back to Ramona, but leave you with the Religion Media Centre website address. Do please look us up, and you get your free daily news bulletin. Have I spoken enough now, Ramona? I think I've exactly 15 minutes.
Perfectly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. You touched on so many topics that we will unpack later, like religious literacy, representation, and better reporting on faith perspectives. So we will unpack that in the conversation. Thank you so much for your presentation. And now I would like to invite Sarah to the podium to offer her reflections on today's topic.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to God, the Lord of all the worlds. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. I declare there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the Prophet of God. Excellencies, brothers, sisters, friends, I greet you with a greeting of peace and mercy from your Lord. Assalamu alaikum. So, before I begin, I actually want to just take a moment, as I have this opportunity to take this moment, to thank Qatar. I want to thank you for this World Cup, actually. Genuinely and from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you. I have loved football since 1978, when I was a 7-year-old girl, and I saw the Argentina World Cup. And I wasn't a Muslim then, but I looked at the television screen. It was a very old-fashioned television screen. And the ticker tape from the semi-finals, because Argentina had got through to the semi-finals, the ticker tape was coming down the sides of the terraces into the crowds. And I was spellbound by this moment. And when it came to the final, it was Argentina versus the Netherlands. And my brother, who was much older than me, says, "Oh, who are you supporting?" And I said, "I'm supporting Argentina." And he said, "Well, what are you supporting Argentina for? You know, Argentina, we support the Netherlands, it's closer, it's European." And I said, No, I'm supporting Argentina. And he was quite adamant that I shouldn't do this. And my mother said, No, leave her alone. She's spellbound by the ticker tape. And I fell in love with football. And I've loved football ever since. Genuinely loved football. And I became Muslim when I was 16. But football in the United Kingdom is not a place for me. It's not really a place for women on the terraces, if I'm honest. It's certainly not a place for a woman looking like this. There's a lot of racism. And it's certainly not a place if you don't like being around drunk people. So sometimes we live quite near the National Stadium. We go and soak up, we think we're going to soak up the atmosphere, my husband and I, of any of the big games. But when we get there, it's not an atmosphere that we really want to soak up. And we often will get racially abused. And often you can't avoid the alcohol. And it's a very uncomfortable place. So I want to thank you for hosting this. And I want to thank you for holding your ground, because I know you are under so much pressure. And it's my 30th wedding anniversary. Indeed, it is my 30th wedding anniversary today. Thank you. My husband's here, and his gift for me, for my 30th wedding anniversary, was tickets to the World Cup. So we've been to, alhamdulillah, 6 matches. And I'm very lucky to have a husband who knows that the gift I wanted was tickets to the World Cup, so alhamdulillah. But I really, really genuinely want to thank you. And as I say, I know that it wasn't easy for you. But from the moment I saw the opening ceremony, and I did see the opening ceremony on YouTube because it wasn't shown on national television in my country, but I also want to thank you for how you portrayed yourselves. To see Ghanem Al-Mufta, mashallah, that you chose him to be the face of your nation, made me very proud. It made me very proud. In England, there are 14.6 million disabled people. There are 1.9% of the population are in wheelchairs. And you would have thought, well, I would have thought, that disability rights campaigners would have been wondrous at the way you chose to portray and the individual you chose to host. But unfortunately, that wasn't the politics of our day. But I want you to know that your opening ceremony was seen. It was seen by us. We may have had to have gone looking for it on YouTube, but we saw it. And I want you to know that its censorship was seen. We saw that it was censored. And I want you to know that its censorship was noted. We noted it. And we will remember. Anyway, that was, my introductory remarks, but I had this opportunity and I wanted to say it. So thank you. Jazakallah khair, may Allah reward you. So Britain is my home. It is the home of my ancestors. I often wonder whether it will be the home of my descendants, though. And that is not an easy thing to say, because I have committed my life to trying to show that we have a British Islamic identity, that we can be Muslims in Britain, that, Islam is a faith, not a culture, that I am English. I have a whole history, and my ancestors are English. But it is hard, actually. We are asked to hold space for each other in a plural, tolerant society, and we're told that that is what we are, a plural, tolerant society. And I'm happy to hold space. But I ask that space is held for us, as faith practitioners, as Muslims. We say too, okay, we will hold space. This is good. We live in a plural, tolerant society. This is what you're telling us, to hold space for us. But that is not always what happens. And I want you to know that too. I want you to know that our own Prime Minister, who is not our Prime Minister anymore, described Muslim women's dress as like letterboxes. How do we have a lack of faith literacy? Is because those who are in power do not actually really want faith and the people to be literate. We are told, if you don't like it here, go and live somewhere else. Go to your countries, go to your Arab world. And then we come and then they say, oh, actually, we want the Arab world to look like us. Because the colonizer mentality still exists. And we think that we can have a homogenic perspective and export that all over the world. And we can tell you how you can have your World Cup. We can tell you how you should be. But then when they tell us, go and live somewhere else. Well, when we go and live somewhere else, they want that somewhere else to be exactly like them. That is not tolerance. That is not civilizations trying to live together and work on the problems that this whole world faces. That is saying that we want every high street to look the same. We want every country to look the same, and we want it to look like us. And yes, we will have a white Jesus, and we will export him as we want. And we will not hold this. And as Muslims in Britain, we do hold lines. We hold very many lines, actually. We hold the line of faith in schools. Because I tell you something, and you should be so proud of our young people. Because we are young people. Michael mentioned the census, the growing numbers of Muslims. Yes, in Britain, we are a growing number. And 50% of us are under the age of 24. A hugely young population. And those young people, mashallah, they do fill our mosques. They are in our mosques. And I want us to remember that, actually, because the mosques in Britain, alhamdulillah, are full. You go to Regent's Park Mosque on a Friday, a normal Friday, not Ramadan, not the Eid, but just an ordinary Friday. You will be praying outside if you don't get there early enough. The women's section, you'll be praying on top of each other if you don't get there early enough. East London Mosque, which is in one of the poorest neighbourhoods in the entire country, where 40% of the population live on the poverty line, the mosque is heaving, 20,000, 25,000 people on an ordinary Jummah. And our young people, subhanallah, there is a school, a young person I was talking to quite recently, they're not allowed to pray Jummah in the school. They pray Jummah in the car park, in the rain, in the snow. And they will say the name of Jesus, and they will say it with pride, Isa alayhi salam, and we will hold the line and say, yes, he was born of Maryam alayhi salam. She was born of a virgin through the power of God. And no, we don't believe he was divine, but we believe he was a prophet of God. And we love him. And so, when we talk about spiritual crises, actually, alhamdulillah, I don't believe really globally there is one. We're made to think that there is one. We're made to think that religion is dead. But actually, the fitrah of the human being is towards Allah. It is in us. And no matter what society does to push that down, to try and the al-mala, the chiefs, the opinion makers, the influencers, those that actually want to hold you down and not to let you speak to the people. No matter how much the hard work that they put in, the fitrah of the soul is towards remembrance of God, is towards our spiritual recognition. And so, there was a French priest, his Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and he talked about we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And we know this as Muslims. We are spiritual beings, and we're here in this world for some time, but we come from Allah and we will return to Allah. We come from God, we will return to God. We're here, as the Prophet ﷺ said, just for a few minutes, like passing, waiting under a tree until we journey along. The life of this world is but a pastime and a game. Lo, the home of the hereafter, that is life if they but knew. And we remember that. And Ramona mentioned the media company that my husband and I founded and worked on for a decade of our lives. But it had 4 C's. And the first C was that we wanted to promote confidence in Muslims. Confidence. We wanted to show not what Islam was against, because we had spent so much of our lives saying we're anti-violence, anti-terrorism, anti-extremism, and for sure we are anti all of these things, but we are for justice, for beauty, for peace. What are we for? And we have to create confident citizens, confident Muslims, because confident people are able to contribute. And contribute to what? Contribute to the common good. Because Islam and the Prophet ﷺ did not come for the Muslims. Islam is not a religion for Muslims. We are here for the world, to bring mercy onto the world. The Prophet ﷺ came as a mercy onto mankind. So we want to create confident people who contribute to the common good and to be connected to each other, connected to Allah, connected to human beings, connected to nature. And we need to be connected to these things, and we should be so proud of our faith, because it has genuinely the answers to the crises that as human beings we face. And I don't mean that in a glib way or an easy way. Oh, Islam is the solution. No, I'm not talking that. It's going to require real hard work, but we have to have confidence that it is there within the faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed onto us in this world as a gift to the whole of humanity. And we face crisis, and I'm going to just mention three, and then I will come back to the panel, and I'm sure, inshallah, we will talk about them. But these are the three which I worry about that keep me up at night. One is the climate crisis, because for sure, no matter what faith you are or no faith, or which country you live in, unless we react to and solve and are aware of and take diligently our responsibility to the planet, we are all in trouble. And I would say, yes, for sure, I live in the West, and we are the ones that, have fundamentally since 1950 and our industrialization caused the problem. But we're all going to have to find the solutions. And we have to make sure that we are awake. Islam makes sure that we are awake. Islam doesn't anesthetize us. It says, keep awake, look out. And the prophets were all warners. Noah alayhi salam, when he was on his ark, what was he doing? He's warning the people. And we need to warn the people in relation to the climate crisis. The second thing, which I hope we talk about, is the technological crisis. I've just finished a dissertation in artificial intelligence and faith perspectives in relation to education, because technology has many things which can help us. And certainly my perspectives or things I was looking at was education of out-of-school children, which is a major global issue. But we have to be careful about how we use technology and how our young people use technology. There is a reason why Silicon Valley CEOs do not let their children have phones and iPads, and we can discuss that. And the other one is an economic crisis. And I'm not talking about the economic crisis that we have back home, where there's a cost of living crisis and people can't afford to heat their homes and people are in food banks. I'm not talking about that crisis, although that is a crisis. I'm talking a crisis where we have allowed corporations to put profit above people, profit above families, profit above the environment, profit above the earth. And we have made profit our God and centralized profit. And that is an economic crisis. And we have to look in terms of our solutions and our spiritual solutions, not in certain ways that we have just renamed the same systems but just given them Muslim names in order to reframe them, but actual proper solutions that will centralize and help and bring about justice, because Islam is a religion of justice. And the Quran says very clearly, be just, for justice is the closest to God consciousness. Okay, Jazakallah khair. With those few opening remarks, I'm going to rejoin the panel. Anything I've said is from Allah, the mistakes they are mine. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was so pertinent and so poignant and so important for today that we are going to discuss, as you say, in the conversation. But before I go into that, we also are very, very honored to have with us the Archbishop of the Qatar Greek Orthodox Church with us today, Archbishop Macarius. Thank you so much for being with us. I would love for you to just give some reflections, please. Thank you. The mic is...
Yes. Well, good evening to the podium. Good evening to the dear guests. I'm very delighted to be with you today in this speech, in this, as I am a resident in Qatar and I have lived for the last of the 18 years of my life spent in Qatar, and I have noticed all the progress. And I was here when it was received. The historical, can say, chose to be Qatar hosting the World Cup 2022. It was a decade before. I was wondering if I'll be on that time in Qatar. So Alhamdulillah, I'm here, and all of us, we are here and sharing this great event. Now, we are living in a big crisis, and it is noticed from many aspects. Of course, to me, as a clergy, I'm focused to the spiritual crisis. And it is based, unfortunately, to the abuse of the great honor that God created us and gave this creation to be governed by us, by people, and we abused. And we have changed the values, and we have changed many aspects, and now we are about to pay the price. And unfortunately, the moral values is not anymore affected, and is not anymore important. And we notice the materialism. It is as a big power that want to change everything, and everything to explain in material rules and in material measures. So we are request as religious people that we believe everyone in the God in the relation and the religion that he has chosen to continue to have the values that it was given and taught from our religion in order to preserve what can be preserved from this world. Because you see crises, wars, big distractions, big catastrophes, they are happening. So we noticed and we see that we are very near to something very big to happen. So what is our role? We have to pray, and we have to return to our values, and in order to defend and to preserve what can be preserved from this wonderful world that it was created by God and gave to us that to be governed. So thank you for these wonderful speeches of that we have heard. And thank you for giving me the word and to say of this, my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Archbishop Makarios. Thank you for your thoughts, and thank you for being here as well. And now we will open up the conversation between the three of us, and Michael and Sarah. You know, as I mentioned, you've lived through many personal and general crises. We've lived through the pandemic. You've had many things in your personal lives and your professional lives. I just wanted to draw on the broader theological level as well as your personal experiences. What does Christianity and what does Islam say about how we approach times of crisis? And how do you personally incorporate that into your lived faith experiences?
Shall I go first?
Michael can go first.
Well, certainly, I suppose my biggest crisis came when I left the BBC, which is an interesting time in my life. And I very quickly went to the Psalms in the Hebrew scriptures and, of course, the Christian scriptures. All of life is in the Psalms. They were written, 3,000 years ago? I could not believe reading them again. I've read them lots of times, but in my morning prayer, I'd read them, and I was sitting there thinking, how on earth did this man 3,000 years ago know exactly how I'd be feeling today? And there are some marvelous, marvelous words in there that I found hugely comforting. And I've revisit them during many crises in my life. And the 23rd Psalm particularly, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, is one of my absolute mantras for my life. So I find my help there.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah. So, thank you so much. And Sarah?
Bismillah. I don't want to be glib about it, actually, because Allah tests, God tests, and those tests are not always easy. I can't say that every test of my life I have been like, oh, it's perfect, and I go to the Quran and I'm all of a sudden I'm not. The test comes again and again and again. But God says in the Quran, do you think you'll say, I believe, and you will not be tested? And he tests us in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes he tests us with hardship, but he might test us with ease. And in fact, sometimes the hardship is easy because at least you know you're being tested. It's when you have so much ease you don't realize you're being tested. That can be even more problematic. But I have to say that for the past 10 years of my life, my daughter, unfortunately, our daughter, has not been well. And that has been an enormous test. And I have asked Allah, and I've said, and I haven't always, it's not been easy. It's not as if it was like, oh, Allah, that's all straightforward. He's pushed me. And I suppose what I try and do is remember that his tests are perfectly weighted for each of us. And we will not be tested with more than we can bear. But la ilaha illallah, sometimes he will take us close to the edge of where we can bear, or what we feel we can bear. And I try and remember that the merciful is the merciful, and that the life he's giving me is to purify me, and that this life is temporary, and that the life of the hereafter, that is life. If I but remember that, and I try and remember that, but the opportunity to do good in this world, the opportunity to serve Allah, the opportunity to pass his tests, whether it be GCSEs, A-levels, a degree, a PhD, postdoctoral. He's taking us on the levels, and we're trying to pass the test because, inshallah, the Jannah is there. But it is not easy, and we have to remind each other and to keep good company.
Yes, thank you for that, for sharing that very personal crisis. And I know I had seen what you've been through as well. And all of us do face these personal crises, and also in the context of global crises, we're struggling all the time. And the pandemic was something that all of us experienced, all of us went through. And it also affected people's spirituality in very interesting ways. Michael, you had something to say about the engagement, the level of engagement that you saw with spirituality and faith experiences online. Could you just talk about that?
It was extraordinary. I've got lots of contacts in various Christian churches around the country, and when the pandemic first arrived and we all went online onto our Zoom services, I think on a Sunday morning I was attending about 7 different services. Suddenly the world opened up. I could go to church, as it were, on Zoom in London at the big Methodist Central Hall. I could go to church at St. Paul's. I could go to a vicar's friend in North Norfolk and go to his church. It was a wonderful experience, actually. And there were various reports that people were engaging with faith, which they hadn't done for a long time. And especially initially, there was this great surge of people finding God through their online services. The Methodist Central Hall in London, for instance, their congregation went from about 400 on a normal Sunday to about 40,000. It was bonkers, the way people returned. I have a feeling, though, that post-pandemic, people that were going to church have not returned in the same way. I think other people did find perhaps a new way of approaching their faith through the services of the internet. So it was a bit of a mixed bag, I think.
Yeah, there was access change for people. It was kind of a democratization of access then, and people who didn't feel comfortable going to places of worship could still engage in forms of rituals of worship, but online from their living room. So that was really interesting. I mean, this is a bit of a big question, but it requires a bit of a short answer because of time constraints. But I just wanted to talk about the global challenges that we face. Of course, you've mentioned the pandemic. We also have the refugee crisis that is ongoing. We have politics that is malfunctioning before our eyes. What role do you think spirituality plays, or what role should it play in addressing these very pressing issues? Sarah?
I mean, just on the migrant crisis, you have migrant workers in this country, and you got a lot of stick for it. There was a lot of bad press. SubhanAllah, at least you allow people into your country to work. We offer our migrants who are coming in their most desperate state naval gunboats to shoot them out of the channel. And it's worth remembering that. That is not something that my nation should be proud of. And it goes against, one could argue the Geneva Convention, but it also goes against every moral thing. But you have writers in our press at the moment saying things like, for example, a commentator recently said that actually it's not unchristian. It's not unchristian to turn away the migrants. As if Isa alayhi salam, Jesus would have done that. When we know that the stories of Christ from the Bible, but this was somebody who spoke, and all of our prophets spoke truth to power. We, as people of faith have to speak truth to power, and where there is injustice, we have to speak against that. And that all of the prophets, there is not a single one that didn't speak up for the poor, the weak, and the oppressed. And that is the message that we have to give to the world's powerful, and that we can allow circumstance. But what causes migrant crisis? People want to be in their homes, people want to be in their nations, in their countries, they want to have food in their countries. They don't want to go halfway around the world with nothing more than an iPhone and a backpack. They don't want to have to leave their homes, but what are the wars that cause that? What is the famine that causes it? What is the climate change that causes it? Let's ask about the structural global inequalities that cause the problems in the first place.
And in regards to spirituality as well, I mean, I have a friend who goes to visit the camps in Calais and Dunkirk often, and what strikes her is how these people, they've gone through so much, and yet they have such strong belief in God, and they draw closer to God. So if you'd like to comment on that, Michael, you're nodding.
Well, yeah, I think I wish our politicians were a bit better informed by the faiths available to them, Islam and Christianity, which would very much, make them change their policies, I think. I'm shocked, and I agree with Sarah totally, that I'm ashamed of the way our country, its attitude towards refugees, particularly at the moment. Jesus himself was a refugee, for heaven's sake. And we have enough to share, and we don't.
Thank you so much for being succinct as well. Obviously, you're both entrenched in the media and have been for decades. And media is the go-to for so many people who don't have access to religious communities, who don't know a lot about our faiths or our faith communities, and they consume religion via what they see on television, what they read in the newspapers. And how do you think that influences people's attitudes towards religion? How much power does the media hold in that way?
I'll be brief first, and then to you. I think I'm very worried now by the way young people consume their news and consume their attitudes, and the echo chambers they end up in on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, and how the news they're receiving, the religion they're receiving, is not editorially monitored at all. There is no filter. And I'm concerned that they don't receive, the best quality of editorial content that they should do, and that does worry me a bit. And I want them to know that there is always very good stuff there. I'm a BBC man at my heart. The BBC is good at news, but young people aren't going to it at the moment. So it's a worry for me.
I think there are two issues here. What we will call the mainstream media, but content which is editorial, it's edited, it's collated, it is quote-unquote professional. I have problems with that, actually. I have problems with it because often it is owned by people with interests, and those interests are not necessarily aligned to the people. It's not necessarily aligned to justice.
The BBC shouldn't be.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the BBC because it... but, mainstream newspapers, for example.
Certainly, yeah.
And we look at those, and, there were surveys done about how the majority of people in Britain get their information about Islam through the media. They've hardly met actual Muslims, and that is hugely problematic. We notice, you see correlation between the amount of news stories about refugees and migrants and people's, when we do polling about people's attitudes towards refugees and migrants. When there's lots and lots of news stories in the mainstream media about refugees and migrants, people's attitudes are very negative. When they simmer down and don't talk about refugees and migrants, people's attitudes are more humane. So there is correlation between what goes on. In relation to the BBC, I've got many friends, and Michael, you and I know this, that there are issues. But BBC, alhamdulillah, it's an institution that I've worked with for many, many years, and public broadcasting is something that should be promoted throughout the world, and we hope for it. At the same time, because it is funded by license payers, the government can say, well, we are not going to fund it anymore, and it becomes like a sort of, something round, and people are self-censoring within the BBC, and you have to be careful, and so that's problematic. Just moving very quickly towards social media and the unedited ones, and this is AI and the algorithms and the echo chambers, this is deeply problematic, because because AI works fundamentally, artificial intelligence and the algorithms that are fundamentally about what is you're getting activity in, and extremes, and it can't monitor nuance and middle. It monitors extremes, and so people do end up in echo chambers, and this is hugely problematic, and it is a crisis. Our phones are a crisis, actually, because our phones have been devised, and the apps on our phones have been devised by people who have studied psychology at Stanford, and the behavioralists do watch for example, Coded Bias, Social Dilemma, two very important documentaries that I highly recommend, that ultimately, where you've got individuals from Stanford, our phones have been devised to be addictive. And the apps on them are devised to be addictive. And the AI and the artificial intelligence that's going into them, it's not well-constructed thoughts. So we are going to see increased polarization, increased extremism, and that's extremely worrying.
Yeah. Agreed.
That is so true. And also with TikTok, it's about cultural imperialism as well, because there is different content in the different countries, so it's a bit more brain dead in the UK and the rest of the world. But anyway, I would like to now open it up to the floor, actually, for Q&A. So if there is anybody who does have a question, please raise your hand and a volunteer will come over to you. There is a gentleman in the back in the red shirt on my right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much to both of you, Michael and Sarah. Really insightful, and the statistics at the very beginning, Michael, I think were very informative. And really, I think that's where the question came up to me was, I believe there is a spiritual crisis, and that spiritual crisis could be religion as a way of bringing people together as a social unit, or God in terms of finding something to fill that void. What do you think is filling that void if there is a spiritual crisis? And what is fulfilling that void in terms of God and in terms of a religion to bring people together? There are things that bring people together that aren't necessarily good for the human, right?
Thank you. Great question.
Well, you're reminding me of the word religion and its meaning, which is the re-linking together of things like ligament. That is what religion does, it should do. And I think in its absence, people will find things that will link them together. I mean, here we're celebrating the World Cup. Football is a religion for many people in the UK and elsewhere, I'm sure. That's certainly one thing that would fill the void. I think social media is finding ways of filling that void as well. And people will find their comfort and their community, their tribe, if you like. It's much more available than it would have been, before social media came along. But there's lots of different areas where people go for their community.
The kalima, La ilaha illallah, there is nothing worthy of your worship other than God. It's so powerful because it begins with the negation. And it's a challenge to the human. There's nothing that deserves your attention. Nothing. Except for the one. Except for the one. And I think we need to center God in our discourse. Center the one, the merciful, the uncaused cause of all creation. And by doing that, we remind people of our beginning and of our return. And it is essential for the human sense of self, this human sense of purpose. We come from him and we will return to him. And everything else is a distraction. Everything, the life of this world is but a pastime and a game. Lo, the home of the hereafter, that is life. Now, however we play that game, however we are distracted, and of course we will be distracted because we have been created forgetful. We will forget. But the mercy, and I try and remind, particularly when I'm speaking to young people and they feel that they have come away from Allah, I try and remind them of the beautiful Hadith Qudsi, the beautiful sacred tradition that reminds the son of Adam, he committed a sin, but he remembers he has a Lord who forgives sins and punishes for sins. And Allah forgives. And he forgets again, and he comes to, but he remembers he has a Lord who forgives sins and punishes for sins, and he forgets again. He remembers he has a Lord and who forgives sins and punishes for sins. And Allah says, do what you wish, for I have forgiven you. As long as we keep that connection, that ultimate connection. And yes, we will be distracted. Of course we will be distracted, because that's our nature. We're created forgetful. But we return and we return. We are returning, and God is most merciful, oft forgiving. I don't know if that answers your question, but the thing is everything can distract us. But if we keep bringing it back to La ilaha illallah, keep bringing it back to that, then we will find the answers to our crises.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You're both giving such wonderful nuggets of wisdom and spiritual advice. Are there any other questions in the audience? Yes, there is a lady over here. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. So it's not really a question that I have, but it's more so insight with social media, how you said, and media within itself. I'm also a revert. I've been a revert for a while. I come from a Sikh background. My parents and my family still do really hate Muslims because social media has prompted us to hate Muslims. So when I had later on in college started hanging around with more Muslims and everything, I was also told by my parents that I was hanging around with terrorists due to 9/11 and obviously everything that happened. This is what we're told. My parents not long ago actually gave me a choice. Either you choose Islam or you choose your family. Obviously there was no choice for me, and it was Islam. It's only my brother recently that has still started to talk to me because of Qatar that has hosted the World Cup. And people have actually come here and have opened their eyes to what Islam is and what Muslims are and what an Islamic country is like, where he has relationship with me now. Even though I tried my best to show him what Muslims are like, when you're so close-minded and you live in the UK and everything is so negative about Islam, after coming here and non-Muslims turning around and saying that, you know what, actually Muslims aren't like this, and you know, Qatar has done so well within the World Cup, the way they've hosted people and the generosity that they've had towards people, it's been quite nice. So when it comes to social media, I 100% agree that it's people are sheep, they follow what they've been told to follow. So thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing that with us as well. That's incredible, isn't it, that the platform of the World Cup has now reconnected you with your brother in that way. That's amazing. Oh, we have a question on this side. The man who has got a lot of husbands in trouble for any upcoming anniversaries.
You both mentioned going to church and going to mosque as an expression or manifestation of faith. I remember a saying of the Prophet that there was a prostitute who gave water to a thirsty dog, and that was sufficient for her to be entered into paradise. We don't even know what faith she was. I think being of service in whatever capacity, of whatever faith you are, being of service to God's creation, whether they're animals or human beings, or nature, certainly being a custodian of nature, is the important thing, and is the connection that you mentioned. Because by being of service and having that intention, you are connecting yourself to God. And it can be tremendously satisfying when you help someone, when you help a child, or even an adult who cannot read, for example, and you help them to read. And it's something anyone can do. We don't have to be scholars to be of service. We don't have to be great politicians to be of service. Of course, they have more responsibility on them for what they are. But even an ordinary person can be of service to a child, an adult, an animal, to nature. And that way, that person can find favor with God.
Thank you. So spirituality is in service. Would you like to make any comments to that?
Don't want to talk to your husband. Yes, of course, I completely agree. I was just nodding along, agreeing with your comments all the time. You don't have to be up there to serve, of course. Anyone can.
And thank you for that reminder. Ultimately, the golden rule, it says in the Bible, love God with all your heart and with all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we know that multiple times in the Quran when it talks about faith, but it's also and good action. And, just Surah Al-Asr, we are in a state of loss, bar those who have faith and do good works, and do good works, and do good works. And it is repeated again and again and again in the Quran, reminding us again, and do good works, and do good works. So yes, a life of service to our fellow human beings and to the earth is the means by which we live and we serve God. The Hadith Qudsi, I was hungry and you visited me not. I was poor and you visited me not. How is this possible? The majestic was because so-and-so was ill and you did not visit. So-and-so was hungry and you did not visit. And these are the reminders. And this is, ultimately what faith teaches us. Faith is action. It is active. And I think faith and action are so connected that it's not just asking for God. God does not change the situation of a people until we change that which is within our heart. And we act in the world. Musa alayhi salam, he comes to the river and the sea, and it's not split. God, of course, if he just split it, but he forces Musa to put down his staff, to bang down his staff, to say act as well. We have to do our part. Of course, it is always through Allah who does it, but we have to act and we have to serve. And the pandemic was a good example of service. And certainly in relation to interfaith and the interfaith work I do now, I will only do interfaith work. It's not tea and biscuits. It's not theoretical. It is about food banks. It is about social housing. And we have these crises in the United Kingdom, and we have to work together. It is not a clash of civilizations, but I would go beyond that. It's merely the coexistence. It has to be the cooperation of civilizations. And we have to cooperate with each other and look at our global crises.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for all of your excellent contributions. I'm very sad to finish it there. We could have gone on for much longer, but please could you join me in thanking our brilliant contributors, Michael Wakelin and Sarah Joseph. Really, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. And before we finish up this afternoon, let's just take a quick look at what we've got coming up. On Wednesday at 3 p.m, we have the Snapchat Sheikh, Imam Saheb Webb, alongside the former MTV presenter Christiana Baka and the much-beloved Imam Siraj Wahaj, who are joining us for discussing their journeys to Islam and what's happened after that. So let's just take a quick look at the trailer.
Disobeying him, and he loved us so much that he brought us from his disobedience to his obedience out of pure rahmah.
I swear by Allah, if I had nothing, had no money, and homeless in a homeless shelter, or living in the street, or living in a park, I have everything because I'm Muslim. And if I didn't die Muslim, then I'm a happy man.
So definitely book your tickets for that. And also coming up on Thursday at 3 p.m, this is especially for the sporting fans among us, we have the former Rugby Premier League legend Sonny B. Williams joining us, as well as the former Arsenal midfielder Abu Diaby. I mean, my mum would have loved to come to that. They will be discussing faith, sports, and the importance of channeling our common humanity during the world's most watched sporting event. And on Friday, we're at the awe-inspiring Katara Amphitheatre for an evening of spiritual reflection on the importance of unity, hope, and humanity with Nauman Ali Khan and Imam Suraj Wahaj. Tickets are live, so please do reserve your seat by scanning the QR code on the screen. And what a finale we have for you coming up on Saturday evening. Please roll the clip. That was Tahiyya playing just now. It's the World Cup anthem by the brilliant Hamoud Al-Khuda and Maher Zain. The video has already garnered over 32 million views. So if you haven't seen it already, please do make sure that you check it out. It's a beautiful video. It encapsulates the true spirit of the Qatar World Cup 2022. And you can see Maher Zain live in concert on Saturday the 17th, so please do book as soon as you can. Finally, a huge thank you to the Exploring Islam Foundation and the Islam and Muslims Initiative for making this afternoon happen. Thank you also to our brilliant volunteers that are dotted around the auditorium and the team here at the National Museum of Qatar. Thank you again to our wonderful speakers. And of course, thank you to all of you for making the time to come and join us for this compelling discussion today. We really do hope that we'll be able to see you at future events, but for now, please have a safe journey home. Salam.